All right, welcome to the first ever recording of Critics of the Coast. I'm Gabe from Unsolicited Designs. I'm joined by Somniphore, my friend Sean, and our other good friend Colin. This is three members of our usual Commander play group. And so we're just going to be going through the new set, Murders of Karlov Manor, in a few different topics here, and just giving our opinions on a whole variety of topics like the theme, flavor, the art, and then the mechanics of the set. And we'll just see where we go. So, how are you guys doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
I'm feeling alright. I was a little under the weather, so I still have to record the audio for the redesigned versions of the cards that I was doing. But I've got those all sorted out and ready to go. I just need to record that audio, so hopefully that'll be taken care of soon. Now that I'm feeling a little better. And how about you, Colin? How you been?
I too am under the weather, so I have my mixture of lemon juice and honey and water with me. So
Perfect. All right. Yeah. If there's any
hoping that gets me through.
yeah, right. If there's any nose blowing or coughing that has to be done, hopefully that won't be too abrasive for our
I'll try to
listeners.
mute before I do
Same,
any sort
same.
of bodily function.
This is a great start. We're gonna attract a huge fan base this way.
Yeah, everybody's all croaky and
Yeah.
drinking constantly.
Yeah. All right, so Murders of Karlov Manor. I don't know. I know Sean has gotten his hands on some of the cards. We got to see at least one of them last time we got to play together. I've got some cards coming today, and hopefully we've got some time to kind of take in the set a little bit. And so I guess I just want to start us off thinking about the themes of the set. So what do you guys think? Sean, do you have any thoughts on the different themes that we've got here?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I guess that's what they call it, a top-down set, where they
Yeah.
pick a theme and then kind of build all around that.
Right.
So it's detectives and murder mystery kind of
Right.
stuff.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting idea for a set. You can kind of tell like a lot of the influences on it. Like I think there are two cards in this set that reference the Maltese Falcon. There's
Mm-hmm.
Coveted Falcon, which
Yeah.
is like an artifact creature.
Right.
And then there's the case of the Filch Falcon. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm generally a fan of murder mystery
Yeah, as
kind
am
of
I.
media.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do enjoy that. So I like the theme on the whole as the idea. I don't. That doesn't bother me much at all. Colin, how do you feel about that?
No, sorry. No, I agree. I do like that. I like that genre
Hmm.
a little bit. I wouldn't say I'm too well versed in it, but there are
Yeah.
elements of it that I like. I think it's it's kind of a cool design space, I think, to play in, um, because it is pretty, like, it has a lot of tropes, it's like very,
Hmm.
very recognizable. So
Right.
I think that's like it gives them some stuff to play with.
True. I agree.
Whether or not we think they did a good job with it, I suppose we can
Yeah,
find
but we
out
will. We
before
will
we
discuss.
have this
Yeah.
conversation. But I think, yeah, like I think it's a yeah, and Sean hit on the themes too. I think that are pretty prevalent throughout. So
Yeah. Murder
uh,
mystery. I think it's a good idea too. I think a lot of what they're doing with Magic these days is trying to expand the audience for the game. And while I'm not a
Yeah.
huge fan of the targeted designs with like Doctor Who and 40K, not that I dislike those IPs. It's just that like okay, we're specifically kind of targeting audiences by IPs. I'm not a huge fan of that. I do like this approach a lot better though, where it's a more broad. Hey, murder mystery. There's lots of different characters and tropes to pull from, and I think that appeals to a wide audience. Much instead of middle-aged nerds like us, there's lots of other people that will be interested in that, and I can be on board with that too. So I do like where that is
I,
going.
yeah, and I think along those lines, right? Like this isn't altogether different than what they tried to do with like Eldraine, right? And I think
Hmm.
that was a pretty I would say like I don't know exactly what your guys thought on those two specific sets, but like I think they did a good job with that. I think those sets were pretty fun.
Yes.
They introduced some kind of fun stuff, and this is kind of feels similar. Like you to your point, it's not focused on a pre-existing like work, but more of
Hmm.
like a genre. So like I think that's cool.
Right.
I think
Right.
I would rather see more of that
Yes.
than
Yeah. I
than
like Lord of the Rings, but I don't necessarily want to be casting Gandalf, and so instead of
uh,
making a Rapunzel set or something like that, or like a Shrek set to be like their fairy tale theme, like okay, we just took fairy tales in general. We turn that into Eldraine. Yeah, I can get behind that. And the same thing here with this murder mystery theme. You know, I can get behind that when it's not so, you know, on the nose
Yeah,
referential.
exactly.
Yeah. So, with that in mind, then some of the different flavors here. Any of the tropes, Sean? You mentioned the Maltese Falcon. That's actually a movie that I really like, so I was happy to see that kind of reference in here. I don't know if there's any other references that kind of called out to you guys that you really enjoyed in this set, Sean.
Yeah, like I kind of got big like Rear Window vibes
Mm-hmm.
from that Undergrowth Recon. The
Ah,
two and a green, two green and a colorless enchantment that's at the beginning of your upkeep. You return a land card graveyard to the battlefield tapped. You know, it's like looking through a camera. Kind of reminded me of like Jimmy Stewart peering out his
yeah.
window.
That's a great call. I didn't make that connection, but now that you mention it, I could definitely see that easily. That's a good one.
Yeah. And then I thought they also just had some like kind of clever, you know, tropey names for cards. Obviously, there's a card called Red Herring,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty on the nose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Killer Among Us is, also kind of like, you're trapped in a room with a bunch of people, and one of them is the murderer.
Right.
Um, Concealed Weapon, like those, the kind of names that they gave some of these cards, I think, were pretty spot on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was pretty good. The Columbo reference card, I like. I've not watched a whole lot of Columbo, but I know enough of it from my parents where it's like, oh yeah, like this is how everything goes. Where he's like, oh, the murderer thinks they've got away with it, and one last thing, actually, I'm gonna bust you. So I like that reference a
Exactly.
lot. Final word, Phantom.
Um, there was one. It's kind of more a general thing, but it's very specific to one card too. But the dog walker card
Oh
I
yeah.
think is actually kind of a funny trope too because it's like that scene in a movie, right, where the hero is in particularly like tense moment, right? Maybe they're like on the trail of something and they see uh something is like trailing something or whatever,
Hmm.
and then something kind of jumps out at them, but it turns out it's just something totally innocuous
Right.
and
Right. Yeah.
harmless. So they were never, you build the tension and then it's like, it's actually
Yeah.
like a cat jumping out of a cabinet or something.
Yeah.
But with that
That
card
jump
too,
scare.
it's like, you cast it face down or whatever. It's in disguise. It could be anything. It could be some sort of horrible monster, and
Hmm.
it's just, the person walking their dog.
Yeah.
So I like that kind of like fake out. That
Sure.
card feels very true to that
Yeah.
genre.
That's a nice pickup, Colin. And speaking of dogs, though, how do you feel about having Scooby Doo in Magic?
So I think I'm fine with that. I think
Uh,
it's like it's silly. It's just silly enough.
just silly enough. Yeah.
But it's not like, yeah, it's not over the top. Like they didn't lean too heavy into it. It's just the one card, and it's pretty on the nose, I suppose. But in a way that's still, if you're not looking for it, it's not even in like the main set, really. I don't think
Hmm.
so. You
And I
can kind
think
of
it,
avoid that pretty easy.
and I think it's, Magic IP enough. Like it's not like Scooby
Yeah,
Doo Secret Lair or
Right.
whatever, but it's like
Exactly.
yeah,
a
yeah,
kind of like a fun callback to it.
Right.
Same
yeah,
with like the
yeah,
other card that references it, whether meddling youths or
Hmm. Yeah.
meddling kids or
yeah,
whatever
yeah,
it's called.
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And
Kind of just like I was
yeah,
gonna say,
that's
it's
like
kind of
a. Sorry, go ahead.
no, it's like a fun throwback, a little
Yeah,
tongue in cheek.
yeah, for sure. That feels like a good entry point to that genre too. Like I feel like that we all kind of went through when we were much younger. Like everybody watched Scooby Doo, and so you
Hmm.
kind of had you had that sort of blueprint to the genre from a very young age, and
Sure.
I think paying light tribute to it is pretty
Yeah.
is
And
was fair.
right. And again, to the point that I think we were making earlier with the theme is like Eldraine and Murders of Karlov Manor. It's like, okay, we can reference these things, and I'm happy with that. But when it becomes, legendary creature Scooby Doo, like, I don't really want to be casting that or playing that.
Yeah,
But yeah, so I think this is a
yeah.
tasteful enough way to go about it.
You don't
Okay.
want to cast the mystery machine vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. They actually, I was looking for that. I'm not sure that it's actually in the set. If they made the Mystery Machine, I might have missed that. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
So any facsimile of the Mystery Machine is fine, but as long as it's not actually called that, then I'm
yeah.
all right with it.
Side
So
eye. Yeah.
the one thing I was thinking about this though, as far as the flavor goes, um, one thing that I feel strongly about is I think the flavor is fine, but I really wish they had applied this to a different plane. What are your thoughts about that? About Ravnica being the murder mystery plane?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in agreement with that. Like it, I think just by nature and like the kind of murder mystery noir
Hmm.
kind of aesthetic, I think it really lends itself more to like something like, I don't know, New Capenna.
Yeah.
But having it on Ravnica kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense because if you look at the cards, there's like no real indication. Like they, didn't use the watermarks that they usually use
Hmm.
for Ravnica. There's no like guild named anything.
Right.
They might reference some of like the guild locations, like Rubble Belt or whatever,
Right.
Rot Farm kind of stuff. But
It
it's
doesn't
not
lean into the
like,
traditional Ravnica setting that we're used
yeah,
to, in the guilds and their locations.
yeah, like they could have just as easily thrown a dart at a wall with all the planes, and you know, I think they just kind of like wanted to cash in on the equity of like, well, Ravnica's been a popular set, and we by by law obligated
Yeah.
to go back there once every 3 or 4
Right.
years, and
It does
it's
feel a little,
overdue.
yeah, it feels a little Sony Spider-Man esque, where it's like we own this property, and as long as we put something out every couple of years, we'll continue to own it. And
Yeah,
that's kind of I feel how it's been a little shoehorned here into Ravnica. Like I could see this set taking place on Innistrad certainly, but I agree with you, Sean, that New Capenna is like by far the ideal location for this
Yeah.
set. It's a plane with rampant with crime. There are gangs, and at the time, when they made the set, there was no law enforcement elements. They explicitly stated they didn't want to include that at the
yeah,
time, and it's like okay, well now we can revisit it. Obviously, maybe a little quickly for what Wizards would like, but revisit it with this private detective element, which you can kind of fill in as that the law enforcement that they were missing the first time around, and plus the style, the period of New Capenna with that Art Deco, everything like that. Noir, I think would have been awesome for that, and I guess I would have liked to see the flavor of this be a little more noir, a little darker. But again, this is they're appealing for a wider audience, so I can understand kind of taking all of the mystery tropes. But yeah, I think they
yeah.
missed badly with putting this on Ravnica instead of New Capenna.
Yeah, and I have like a similar complaint to that with like especially the art direction and the
Hmm.
the kind of noir feel, for a set that's called Murders at Karlov Manor. It's like a lot of the art in the set is like pretty brightly
Hmm.
colored, and um it's not as, like dark and shadowy as a
Right.
name like that should suggest.
Right. Yeah, it sounds pretty grim. It sounds yeah, and it's really not that serious. And to that point, one of the other things I think that um, the flavor of the set really fails on is, and I don't want to offend anyone here who might be a fan of movies like Cars, the Pixar movie Cars, but their set Mercer Call of Mana felt to me more like the Cars of a Magic set, where it's like what I mean by that is Cars is kind of like, oh, here's a world that's just filled with cars. It's not like a world made by cars. What would a building look like if it was designed for cars to use? It's like no, it's just our normal buildings, except cars are inside them now. And
Right.
and this set isn't like, oh, what would Ravnica be like if murder mysteries was a big thing. Like, it's not like it's just more like, oh, we're in Ravnica, and what if everything was a murder mystery? Like your grandmother is a detective, I'm a detective, everyone's a detective, we're all detecting things. And it's just kind of like,
Yeah.
okay, it just seems a little silly in that way. I don't know if you understand what I'm getting at with that, Colin or Sean. What do you think?
I mean, I definitely understand that, and I think part of what also pushes that feeling, and we could probably talk about it if we talk about like more about the art, but
Yeah, we'll get to that.
yeah, like just the way they wanted to depict everything as being like either a detective or, investigation kind of
Hmm.
stuff. Like they really kind of went heavy-handed on like the actual symbols involved.
Yeah. What do you think, Colin?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point too, especially about the cars. I never really thought of it like that, but yeah, it's like a reskinning, I guess,
Hmm.
of like the world that we already have in place. So I think that is a good comparison, and I think that fits with what we were saying about or what you guys were saying about the putting it, maybe it feels more at home on like a Capenna or something. You maybe could have done that and
Right.
had like a little bit more because it's not so established either, right? We've only been there like once, so
Mm-hmm.
I think you would have that chance to really do some more. Uh, you could kind of really mold it a lot more easily, and really people wouldn't get so offended if you like changed a bunch or like
Mm-hmm.
you'd have some room to redesign those buildings to keep going with like the cars analogy, like to make it like make that world make more sense to
Right.
its inhabitants, right? Yeah, so I think sticking it to a place that has like a more established, it has been around for much longer. It's harder to really that sort of holds them that kind of holds them back then, I
Yeah,
guess.
it's so
Really do
established,
it.
and they're kind of turning it on its head. Which, to be fair, I guess you don't want something to get too stale. But I think it just seems kind of silly to me overall, where it's like, okay, we're making Detective World. Where is that? Like, oh, let's just put it on Ravnica instead of trying to find a place where it might fit more naturally. And so that's just kind of
Yeah.
what came to
Yeah.
my mind. Okay, so
And I
Sean,
get the
oh yeah, good.
feeling, obviously, once we go back to Ravnica, inevitably, it's like most of this will probably just be dropped. So this is kind of like a just weird flash in the pan, kind of like moment for the plane, maybe. Like you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? Like I don't think there's going to be any kind of longevity to the themes, and I don't know.
Right.
I think that's a really good point. And that's like something that seems like they've struggled with just based on how sets operate now too. It's like things get introduced and then they move on, so fast. Like March of the Machine was supposed to be like this big like Avengers Endgame moment, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just sort of like, well, we've moved on. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like it has any weight to it when you have 3 or 4 more sets scheduled that year, and then
Yeah.
so like yeah, this whole also the concept of a multiverse, I guess, really cheapens any sort of outcomes anyway, because you can always kind of undo things
To an
to
extent,
it's
yeah, I
already sort
agree.
of yeah
Yeah, and I think that was
kind
a
of
complaint with Aftermath, where it's like, oh, these people got turned into Phyrexians, but they're not anymore, so it's not a big deal.
yeah yeah you
They're all
can kind of
totally
just say
fine, and all the
yeah
Phyrexians that
yeah
invaded places are cured now. You know, like
It's all
uh,
good.
uh,
We got to move
yeah
on.
yeah yeah we have other sets to put out.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's no long lasting impact of this because yeah they'll I forget what comes next, but it's not going to build off of this probably in any meaningful way. All the mechanics will kind of get pushed
Yeah.
to the side until they're deemed, necessary to,
Yeah.
like some like modern, Modern Horizons brings them back randomly, or one of the Commander, like
Right.
summer
Right.
sets or something. Yes, they'll resurface randomly at some future
Yeah.
point.
Here and
So,
there. All right. Well, let's get into the art. I think Sean had some things he wanted to tie into that. I have a few things I wanted to bring up as well, but if we're talking about the theme, and Sean, you had some ideas about the art that's tying to that too that you want to bring up.
yeah. So I think the biggest sticking point for me with the art is, kind of how they are showing that things are now detectives, which is
Mm-hmm.
obviously the overuse of hats
Okay.
and magnifying glasses.
Yes. Yeah, that was my
It's
first
like
talking point for art, so this is good. Hmm.
it it just feels like they kind of are like cosplaying, like they took a bunch of characters that we already know from different sets, and they're like, oh, we'll just make them detectives, or
Hmm.
they'll slap like a fedora or like Sherlock Holmes type hat on like anything.
Yes.
There's like the agency outfitter, it's like the 4-3 flying sphinx, and it's got a hat. It's like it just looks so out of place.
Well, I mean, if you're
Granted, I
going to
guess
be
like
outfitted,
functionally,
can you not have a
yeah,
hat?
I guess functionally it does search your deck for thinking cap and magnifying glass. So I guess it's on theme in that sense,
Right.
but it just looks so hokey.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Um, I actually went through the set, and of course, I could be wrong here, but I tried to count the number of cards that clearly depict a hat of some sort in the art somewhere. And just so you have an idea, there are, I believe, 260 non land cards in the set. So basically, because the lands generally don't show creatures, so I just kind of excluded the land cards. But 260 non-land cards. What number or what percentage would you guess of those 260 have people wearing hats in them?
I would guess like 65%.
65%.
Oh
Okay,
wow.
Colin.
That's how it
So,
feels.
yeah. So I think Sean may be a little high, so I'm gonna bid 1% because I assume
One
we're doing
percent.
right
Yeah,
right roll.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's actually, but I could see 31 cards that clearly depicted hats, and that's only 12% of the set. So I was surprised as well because it felt like a lot more, and maybe I wasn't generous enough in my description of what might constitute a hat. But anyone that had like obviously the fedora or like a bowler hat or some kind of adventure hat, I was counting them. So it looked like 31 of the cards had hats on them. So I agree with you. It definitely was a smaller number than I expected it to be. Um, but yeah, I think just the fact that there's so many of them, it's like, oh, you're a detective. What do you have to have? You have to have a hat. Like that. I think that's just a little silly to be
Yeah.
depicting in that much
And a
art.
magnifying glass,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't count the magnifying glasses. That would be interesting to go back and
Well,
I
see.
think so.
they live in a magical world. They can't use magic. They have to use an actual lens.
Yeah,
You
that's
know
true.
what I mean? Like, there's no magic detection system for fingerprints or anything.
Yeah, we have to use the same thing that my 3-year-old uses to tell me that I have gray hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of gets back to what I was saying about cars, where it's like, well, how would they
Yeah.
do it in Ravnica? It's like, well, no, it doesn't. We're not going to really consider that quite as much as like what do detectives look like? Just slap that onto Ravnica, and that's what you get. So I don't think it's quite as well thought out. Were there any pieces of art specifically? You mentioned the agency outfit. Or anything? About any pieces of art that you really liked or wanted to comment on from the set?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of cool art in the set. I like Deadly Cover-Ups art.
Okay, let me grab
It's
that.
the black, like, collect evidence board wipe where
Yeah.
you can also kind of like exile cards from their library.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I like the case of the stashed skeleton
Yes.
because
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
I'm a big skeleton fan.
Yeah, you are. How's that skeleton deck coming?
Well, it's slowly collecting pieces as they get printed.
Yeah, set by set. Yeah, I really liked Coerced to Kill was an art that stood out to me. I really liked. It's the 3 a blue and a black enchantment aura that you gain control of the creature and it becomes a 1/1 assassin basically. It's just very very stylish. That one
That
stood
one,
out to me.
that one is nice. I mean, I even like the art for Murder, like the new art for that with, I guess, Sagana dead.
Oh right, yeah, laying in the pile of coats, all the guild symbols there. Yeah, that one's not bad.
Yeah.
Um, What else? And War Leader's Call. I like that one as well. I guess I enjoy when they kind of go out of like house style more or less, where they kind of let the artist kind of depict something a little more unusual. And I feel like some of these in the set really capture that. Daily Cover Up definitely, and the 2 that I mentioned I think do a nice job of kind of displaying a different style in the card. So I do like to see that every now and then.
Yeah, I
I
like
think
to see it as well.
one, and Sean, you might have mentioned this when you were talking about the Maltese Falcon. I can't remember, but Coveted Falcon is pretty cool. That has like not like, I don't know. That just has like a good vibe to it. I think it's like very it just looks like a card that I would like. It's like, nighttime. There's the giant full moon. It
hmm
has like a very. It feels like a cold night maybe. Gives me that
Yeah,
vibe. So I don't know. I'm just looking at it, and
Yeah, I think it does
it feels
capture
like
the theme better. Yeah, it's a way to
yeah,
capture the theme without beating you over the head with
yeah,
hats
yeah,
and magnifying
yeah.
glasses.
The bird is not wearing a hat, and it doesn't seem to have a magnifying glass. But it's just yeah, it gives you that like that like you kind of want to draw your coat closer to you and maybe look over your shoulder as you're walking type of
hmm
thing. So
yeah. Pop your collar as you walk down a
yes.
busy street.
There were 2 card arts that stood out to me that I didn't really like from the set, and I'm not an artist, so I don't have much criticism that I can really offer. One of them was Dog Walker, which you mentioned before, Colin. Just the dogs in the art, and I put it in the chat here. But the dogs
Oh,
in the
they're
art are
very beefy.
yes, incredibly muscular looking dogs, and
Yeah.
maybe that's not like anatomically inaccurate, but it just when I look at it, I'm just like, okay, that just seems a little strange to me. I don't know if anyone has a perspective on that. I don't, but
Yeah,
So
they've
you,
been doing like bicep curls and like tricep dips. I don't know. Yeah, they have
yeah,
some like real muscle tone for
a lot of it all over.
Yeah,
Well, I don't
yeah,
think that dog walker is walking them. I think they are walking him.
Yeah,
So they're
absolutely.
yeah.
dragging
That's
him
fair.
along, and it builds the muscle. You see.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, all that pulling that they're doing. The
yeah.
other one that this one
Oh no,
it
is there
does
cat slander coming?
it is a plant cat, and I guess I've got both a cat and dog kind of cards here that I'm criticizing.
I feel attacked.
Yeah, no offense, Colin, but this one has a constant problem for me with some art where they depict, and I don't think it's inaccurate, but when something is further away, obviously it's going to look smaller to you. But they continue to do this with cards where it's like I don't feel like the card is that far away, and the panther here, the front legs look very big, and the back leg looks just like really tiny. So when I look at cards like this, it just looks
I
like he's got tiny little back legs is all he's got,
Yeah,
not the perspective.
yeah.
I don't pick up on that. It just looks like tiny legs to me.
I have the same complaint with the Kellen Inquisitive Prodigy art because it's almost
Uh huh.
exactly like that. Like
Yeah,
his
that's a good
head
call.
and shoulders are huge, but
Yeah.
then his legs are like itty bitty tiny.
yeah, yeah, like he's being stretched out over some incredible distance or
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah. So I understand the reasoning behind it, but just when I see it, I just think it doesn't, it's not quite right. Like how far away is the back leg from me, and like should it be
yeah.
that much smaller? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay. And the other thing of art I have, unless someone else has something they want to comment on, is I just thought the set symbol. To me, I was pretty disappointed to see this as the set symbol. It's like, okay, murders at Karlov Manor. Like, what is it going to be? And it's like, well, it's a knife.
Yeah,
I mean, but not only that, like it also looks so similar to March of the Machine. Like
yeah,
it just
yeah,
doesn't have the ring, the wreath around it, whatever
Mm-hmm.
you want to call it in that. So it's like it's not it's not like new or particularly kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
It's just not distinctive enough. Do you have any thoughts on that, Colin?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's one of the ones where a few years down the road you might see this symbol randomly pop up in like your deck or something if you're going through it, and I don't know that it would jump out to me as, oh yeah, this was from Karlov Manor. Yeah, I don't think it does a good job of really distinguishing this. Yeah, because it does. When I saw it first, it's just like it's another stabbing weapon, right?
Yeah,
It's an
yeah,
easy fallback, because it looks cool, right? But I don't know. I think they could have picked something else.
yeah.
Now, I don't
Good.
want to tell them how to do their job when
Uh huh.
designing set
Sure.
symbols,
That's not what we're talking about
but
here, no.
it just seems to me that like since all the other like Ravnica symbols are kind of like buildings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or city
Yeah.
sections or gates or whatever, and the set is named Murders at Karlov Manor. I mean, why couldn't they have like a knife on top of like a mansion outline or
Mm-hmm.
something? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that way it would kind of tie the symbol to the other Ravnica sets
Sure. I think that would make
a
a lot of
little bit.
sense. I'm gonna go a different direction here though, and I'm gonna suggest they should have just fully committed and made it a hat.
The fedora, yeah, tip fedora, yeah.
And magnifying glass.
Okay. All
There
right.
you
Good thinking. And one
Or a
other
fingerprint. What about just like a fingerprint?
a fingerprint. That would be
go.
interesting.
Fingerprint would have been cool, yeah. Would have been very distinct.
That would have been distinct. That's not a bad idea. Just interesting note. I actually went and looked at the set symbols in Magic's history because I was like, I can't believe they're using a sword or like a bladed weapon. I feel like they've done swords many times. How many times do you think they've used a sword slash like knife as a set symbol?
Um, I can't think of any between besides Marks and the Sheen. I can think of like two axes, like
Yeah,
one in
like Nemesis.
Kaldheim, one for like a goblin.
Yeah,
Elf
I
dueled it.
think like oh yeah, there's that, and I think Nemesis had an axe too. The last time they
Yeah, yeah.
used a sword, it was for Mirrodin block or
Oh
Mirrodin
yeah,
itself
yeah.
in 2003, and then
Right.
the only other time that I could see before that was Arabian Nights in 1993.
Oh, wow.
So
Ah,
yeah,
that's a
so
scimitar.
that's true. I'm just saying it was like you're gonna talk about swords. It's like close enough.
Yeah.
So they used two of those, 93 and 2003. So in 10 years they used that, and they didn't do it again for another 20 years, which is when March of the Machines came out in 2023. And then they just use it again now in Murders of Karlov Manor. So I just thought that was interesting. They only did it once in 10 years, not again for 20 years, and then they did it basically twice within a year's time.
A
So
year.
So I think
That's
that's pretty
very
interesting.
interesting. Yeah, I would have said more, but yeah, I
Yeah,
guess it's just one of those things where you feel like you feel like you've seen it. But yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, I was
I feel
surprised.
like generally the set symbol is like some artifact or symbol of
Hmm.
like the story or set or something, and yeah, this is just like a knife. I guess someone got stabbed. I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't even know that that's true. I did read the story, and I don't recall exactly how Zagana was killed, but I should know. But anyways, yeah, I think they could have done a little better with that. So, are there any other last thoughts on arts, or are you ready to transition over to the mechanics of the set?
No, let's talk about mechanics.
Okay, so I crunched a bunch of numbers here, and I basically looked at all the cards and counted up everything that had certain keywords on it to try and give us an idea of how frequently these cards are appearing here. Um, so I'll just go through kind of in this order that I've prepared here. I don't know if it's on the sheet that I shared with you, but the first one I was going to look at was suspect. So this is a you know not exactly a keyword, I suppose, since it talks about suspecting creatures, but I don't know that it appears like in italics or like as a just an ability on a creature. I think it's always say you suspect a creature, which gives it
Yeah.
both menace and no longer it can't block anymore. So it gets menace and can no longer block. What are your thoughts on this kind of mechanic, Colin? You have any impressions that it gave to you?
Um, yeah, I think this one is fine. I don't know. I don't know that it's like the most exciting thing. It's sort of it fits. It fits with the flavor and stuff like that. But in terms of what I will I use any of those cards? Probably not. I don't know. I could see this one kind of fading.
Yeah,
I don't know. It just didn't. It's like it's fine. I think it's a perfectly cromulent thing to put in
yeah,
your detective set. But mostly it's just like, okay, yeah, I get that. But
yeah.
I don't even know that it is. And I think some of my thoughts on these mechanics, some of it is like I don't know that it really makes a ton of sense to what they named it. It's just like a
Uh
thing
huh.
they thought up, and
Yes.
then it's like, well, we have to give it a name that sounds detective-y. So
Right.
like this kind of feels a little bit like that. But I will say, and I'm looking at this card now, the best use of suspect, in my opinion, is the frantic scapegoat, because I think that's hilarious.
Yes, you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
Let me
like
pull that up.
I may pump the brakes on whether or not I'll use it or anything. I might find a home for this guy, but like the idea that this thing is like enters the battlefield, it gets suspected, and then as soon as anything else comes in, any other creature comes in, it's immediately passing the buck is hilarious.
Yeah, yeah, that is certainly more interesting because lets you use that ability in a slightly different way. I think one of the
Yeah,
shortcomings of the mechanic is that there are very few cards that actually care about it. There's only 19 cards in
yeah,
total in the set, one mythic, two rare, 10 uncommon, and six common cards. And you know, since there's very few cards that actually care about it, they don't really do a whole lot with it in the set. And I think that
yeah,
goes to your point of it being just kind of okay. It doesn't really leave an impression because they're not really using it that much. It's very reserved in how they've used it in the set. You want to add anything to that, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, every set has like the let's call them like tertiary kind of
Mm-hmm.
themes or mechanics where it's like not very supported, only shows up on like a limited number of cards, and I feel like that is suspect in this set.
Yeah, I think
As
it.
far as the mechanic and how it plays out, it's like it's just you have to be like very aggressive
Mm-hmm.
because if you suspect one of your own creatures, like you can't block,
Mm-hmm.
and if you suspect someone else's, it's like then they can't block, but that means you want to be attacking. And like I just don't think it does anything when you're behind, really.
That's true. Yeah, I think it's very much an aggressive strategy type of mechanic. The only card
Yeah.
that really intrigues me with it is Agris Kas, the Mythic, because he suspects the creatures and then he can exile suspected creatures. So it gives you some leeway if you want to put it on your own stuff, but ideally, if you're going to exile your opponent's creatures, you want to slap it on them so you can take advantage of that.
Yeah. And they there are two cards in particular that they put it on that leave me like scratching my head
Okay, what are
because
those?
there's caught red-handed, which is 4 in a red instant that can't be
Mm-hmm.
countered, and you gain control of target creature until end of turn. You untap it, it gains haste, and then you suspect it. But it's an instant. So you can't attack with it on someone else's turn. You
Right.
can't block with it.
Right.
So what's the point of making it instant speed and suspecting it? And then the
Yeah.
other is the like, zombify variant. The it doesn't add up, much like why they printed this card.
Oh,
Where
sickly.
you return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and you also suspect it, and it's also an instant.
Hmm. That
So
one,
it's like, I guess if you do it at end of turn, yeah, you can
yeah,
attack your
right.
next turn with it. But I think part of the flexibility of returning stuff as an instant from your graveyard is also so you have the option to block.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I could see it making more sense with it doesn't add up where it's just like, okay, you can kind of give your creature haste if you can time it that way,
Yeah.
and then not be able to take a double dip and be able to eat a creature that your opponent wasn't suspecting. Call right-handed does seem a little strange to me. My only thought is by suspecting the creature, then they can't block you on your turn if you cast it end of turn or something like that. Uh, but
Oh,
yeah, I
but
think
if they lose control of it and gain it back and it's still suspected,
yeah,
that
so they
makes
can't
sense.
block it. But I don't know why you'd want to do. You would be much better off just casting it on your turn so that you get to take advantage of attacking with the creature as well. So
Yeah.
it seems a little strange to me. Yeah, I don't really get that. And I did see that card. I didn't even realize it was an instant though, because that didn't make sense to me. All the threat and effects are usually sorcery speed, so that's an
Yeah.
interesting call out. Yeah, the other thing I thought about this mechanic is that you know, what with suspects, it's like okay, you kind of want to be able to like eliminate them as is this the person, is this the thief or the criminal or whoever, and get some kind of reward from that. Or I feel like clues should have been tied into this somehow, where it's like you're suspecting creatures, and if they accomplish some certain goal, like maybe your creature's a suspect and it winds up accomplishing some kind of goal and gets cleared of being a suspect, or it gets away with the crime, like maybe there's be some kind of rewards to that. So yeah, I think Colin mentioned this too. The the name fits with the set, but what it doesn't really seem to make sense thematically. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's what, yeah, I think that's because you're agreeing with me, but I do think that's a good point to make in that um it seems like the whole suspect thing is it kind of just it makes whatever like the creature like nervous, right? Like that's
hmm
what it is like it's the Kingsley just walked into the room.
that would be Colin's
He's
cat, one
gonna
of them.
participate. Yeah, so it makes them nervous, right? So they're just like hurrying up and they're like making mistakes. They're
Sure, flavor
yeah. So like
wise,
I get flavor wise, like I get that part of it, but I think outside of frantic scapegoat, I'm not sure. I'm not sure like that's what I really want from like that ability, right? Like I
yeah,
think what you're saying makes more sense. Where you when you have I just feels like it should do something else.
yeah,
Like you're saying, like you have a row of suspects, and then you're eliminating them or something, and that's it just doesn't. Yeah, it just feels like a skin that they put on this ability that they had. It's for like
yeah.
you know whatever. But
To Sean's
yeah, so
point, it
yeah, I
doesn't
think
add
that makes
up.
a lot of sense.
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
add up. Okay, so moving on from that, then we get to disguise and cloak cards. So basically, the newest flavor of morph. There are. I don't know if you wanted to guess how many cards there are with disguise and cloak on it. I don't know anyone care to do that.
I
Make
will
you
say
guys guess.
65% of the
65%.
cards.
Doubling down. Yeah,
It's
I'll go 15%.
yeah, it's at 41 cards. So I didn't actually calculate the percentage of that, but out of like 260, what is that? Like
It's 65.
yeah, definitely 65.
Yeah, on the
Sean
nose.
wins. Yeah, 3 mythics, 7 rare, 13 uncommon, 18 common cards. So this is I was gonna say by far the leading theme of the set, but actually there's one other mechanic that comes very close. So this is the leading mechanic of the set. Um, I have thoughts on Disguise and Cloak. We'll go to you guys first. Sean, how do you feel about this mechanic?
I mean, I think it's fine. Although they kind of like spruced it up, like, Morph and Manifest to give the creature ward, like it doesn't feel like new
Mm-hmm.
or exciting.
Right.
Um, but I do think adding the ward is like a nice touch. I think it's It's pretty strong. I don't think the Ward 2 should be discounted, but it
Right.
does also, kind of protect it. You spend 3 mana to turn it up, but like, I don't know, there's a little rinky-dink creature, so it doesn't get like bolted out or
Right.
shocked or something.
Remove too easily. Sure.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the way that Morph to me has always played out is it's such like a huge, huge mana investment
Mm-hmm.
because yeah, you can put the creature into play on the cheap, but in order to really like get any benefit or fully utilize those cards, like you often have to keep the mana up to flip them.
Yeah.
And with this set in particular, there are a couple of like pretty good cards with disguise that I'm into, but a lot of it's just like the bread and butter kind of effects, like destroy an enchantment for I don't know
Right.
6 mana or
Yeah, this one's
something, and
incredibly expensive.
yeah, and it like that is not worth it to me. Is
Yeah.
to keep that man open and then invest that when you can just I don't know, cast
Yeah.
naturalize or
Exactly.
disenchant or something where you're not pouring so much mana into it.
Yeah. I have the same feelings about the mechanic. I think it's a very dated mechanic, and I agree that putting ward on it was a good move. I think that was important and necessary. But
Mhm.
the rate that you can cast effective creatures has changed dramatically since Morph first was a thing. Like before, paying 3 mana for a 2/2 was like okay, that was kind of normal. Now, if you're paying that much mana for a 2/2, it has to do something impressive. Like you have Eternal Witnesses, you have uh, you know cards that are much more effective. And now, if you want, basically with morph creatures, if you want to get your Eternal Witness or your what have you, your Reclamation Sages, you pay the 3 mana to get the 2/2, and then you pay more mana to get the effect. And so, I don't know if it's really worth having just this mystery creature on the board that's going to lose basically any combat it gets into. But it's just like why are you paying 3 mana down payment plus whatever other mana you need to flip the creature up to get the ability that you actually want. So I think it's a mechanic that made sense at one time, and they've done their best to spruce it up. But I still think, the way the game is played, especially these days, you really can't be wasting that much time and mana getting an effect that you could just cast at instant speed for far less, or just on a regular other creature and just do it sorcery speed instead
Yeah,
of sitting around waiting for the right time to present itself.
absolutely. And in Commander too, it's like, there's a reason why you don't see morph creatures very often unless it's like a dedicated morph deck.
Right.
It's just because a lot of times it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They've.
I think
Go, go.
that's. Oh, sorry. I
Okay.
was going to say, like, I think that's a good point, Sean, about like with Commander too, because this feels like uh, the ward is a nice add-on to give it that, but like, I mean, what are the odds that this is going to get targeted anyway? Like,
Mm-hmm.
chances are, you know, maybe early in the game, but I don't think anybody's going to burn tremendous amount of removal on the anticipating that something is like a big threat is going to reveal itself later. I mean, I feel like you're going to want to hold back removal for the actual threats that you can currently see, and maybe that's just like my thought process on it. But like the word is nice, but like I can't imagine that I would be targeting some of this stuff. I don't like preemptively. Like, oh no, I
Right.
don't. Because like there's the chance that if you're it is a dog walker,
Yeah.
and I'm not I really don't want to take go after a 3/1 vigilance.
Yeah. You
Two
make a
dog
good
checks.
point. Because yeah, by their
So
nature,
yeah,
not
there's
knowing what the creature is, you don't really want to try and target it because you don't know what,
yeah,
what you're spending your mana on to remove. So by its very nature, it's probably not going to be targeted that frequently. So I agree the ward is good, and I think it shouldn't be discounted. But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, why give protection to something that's already not being targeted most of the time to begin with? So that does seem a
yeah,
little counterintuitive.
yeah. I think unless you're playing with like a less chaotic player than myself, who you
Hmm.
could probably assume is going to be a good card. but with me, there's a good chance you're going to burn your removal on a dog walker. So I don't think you're going to feel too good.
Know your opponent. Yeah. Right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, 100%. I
Yeah.
like the flavor of it though. I think
Hmm.
putting on disguise is fine. Putting on your hat and your fake mustache or what have you is fine. I like that, like the reveal, like the aha,
Mm-hmm.
moment.
I agree
That's
that
fun.
I agree that it does fit.
That's a fun chaotic element too, and you're like, ah, this
Mm-hmm.
is what it does. Like
Yes.
I like that. I like those reveals, but overall though, I think it's outside of that like sort of silly moment where you're like, oh, and it is or
Yeah.
something else. It's one of the actual good ones. Like I think that part is kind of fun to flip it up and see what it is, get that reveal. It's just like similar to like Foretell was,
Mm-hmm.
you have that Foretell card sitting out there. It could be what could it be? What could it be?
That's
It's fun.
true.
It's like a fun moment, but overall, though, I don't think that. Yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying
Yeah.
about it. It's not
Fortell is a
outside of
good
that one little
comparison.
room.
Yeah, Fortell's a good comparison, but there's one key difference with Fortell cards, and that is usually when you're foretelling the card, you get to cast it later for less mana. Not so like
Yeah.
Yeah.
you're paying two up front, and then usually when you go to cast it, the cost is going to be discounted by at least one or two.
Yeah, that's
And with
fair.
Morph, it's actually the opposite. You're paying more mana. Whatever usually just to cast the creature is usually less than the 3 mana to put it face down, and then it's morph unmorph costs combined. So you're paying more
Yeah.
mana for less. And if you don't turn the card face up, you usually don't get any benefit at all. So it's pretty brutal in that way, especially considering how much they love enter the battlefield effects on creatures now, and the emphasis on
Mm.
being able to blink and flicker them. You get huge value, and you don't get that with morph creatures. So I think that's a big strike against it as well.
Yeah, I can only think of like the one creature that I think you get it for, whether when it enters or when you flip it up, and I think it's the Gadget Technician. You like it's the red and blue one, and you like make a Thopter, and I think
Uh huh.
that's upon entering the battlefield or being turned face
That
up.
is correct. Whenever it enters the battlefield or turn face up. Good catch on that one. Gadget technician.
Yeah, I think that's like the only one I can think of that actually you don't have to disguise.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing about this mechanic that I think they really missed out on is that it should have been tied to suspect in some way, and maybe that means suspect needs to be redesigned somehow. But I feel like okay, you've got all these mysterious face down creatures. Instead of calling them mysterious creature, why not suspicious creature? It's like okay, these are people we
Yeah.
don't know yet. We want to figure out who they are, what they're up to. So I feel like that should have been they should have used these as suspects instead of just the next iteration of morph. I think that would have been a more interesting way to use the mechanics in this set and give it a purpose to you know discover what that face down creature is. Maybe some more emphasis on looking at face down cards, and that is some kind of mechanic in itself. Looking at what the face down cards are, so that you can collect evidence or something of that nature. So I think we're using a dated mechanic and we're slapping a little fresh coat of paint on it, and it's really just not changing a whole lot about it. So, any
Yeah.
other thoughts on that?
Well, I will briefly talk about Cloak.
Oh yeah.
Um, I think I like Cloak a little better. There are like at least two cards that I think are kind of cool with that, and
Hmm.
that's the Vanifar
Right.
um, evolved Enigma, because you can cloak cards from your hand, so it can be something you have no intention of casting, um, and then you can kind of just like get value by making it a creature, like if it's a land or something, and then her
Hmm.
other ability where she puts counters on colorless creatures.
Right.
I think that's cool. Plus, if you're doing some kind of blinks strategy, you can kind of just like cloak something, flicker it out, have it come back in, and boom, all of a
Right.
sudden you can get like a huge discount on the mana. Then
Right.
like you don't have to pay the casting cost, but you could pay like 1 mana flicker kind of spell.
Right.
And then I think the Atrata um, Deadly Fugitive is also pretty cool, because
Yes.
I think that's probably the best use of cloak in the set.
Yeah, I
Just
would agree.
because you can cloak a spell and then surprise you flip it up for 4 mana, and it you know
Yeah,
can
it's
could be
something.
anything.
It could be anything. Even a
Yep.
tutu.
Even a tutu, yeah, even a scorned egotist.
Even a dog walker. Yeah, I agree. Those are the two best uses of that. And then we didn't really touch on cloak, but that's basically being able to put a card from your hand. I don't know if any of them let you cloak from the top of your library, but put a card from your hand into play face down as the 2/2 with ward 2. Yeah, manifest I think has been a good mechanic, and I agree that Atrata is a great use of that mechanic because it lets you use whatever the card is, so you don't feel bad about having your expensive sorcery as a face down 2/2. You get to take advantage of it at some point in time, or your opponent's expensive sorcery.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, cloak I don't have problems with. I think that's yeah. I agree with your comments on that. All right, so I want us to move into the next mechanic then, which is investigate in the clues. And so this is basically the second most represented mechanic in the set. There's 38 total cards, 1 mythic, 11 rare, 12 uncommon, and 14 commons with the mechanic on it. This is a pretty tried and true mechanic, and so I'm pretty much always happy to see it come around. I was just hoping they might do a little more interesting things with the clues this set, and I'm not sure they really hit it out of the park for me in that regard. What were your thoughts about clues, Colin? Were you happy to see them? How do you feel about them, or was there anything you were looking for in this set that they didn't quite do for you?
Yeah, I think I agree with where you are at with it. I mean, I think it's a solid token to utilize. Obviously, it makes sense if it's with the theme. It would be nice if there was some way to pay off of it beyond. And I think like we talked about Scooby Doo earlier, the
Mhm.
Sophia Dog Detective card. I mean, that does give you the option to just set. I think it says any artifact you can sacrifice, so you could kind of get some benefit off of that. But yeah, I think doing something else with them beyond just kind of bringing them back and just doing the investigate thing again would have been nice to kind of do something a little bit more on top of that. But it's a good. I don't think I'll complain too much about bringing it back. It's like yeah, like you described it as tried and true. I think that's a very apt.
Yeah, I think it's a mechanic that they really like having in the game where it can kind of help you smooth out your draws if things aren't going too well. It gives you an opportunity to kind of get back into the game and look at more cards, and I think that's always a good thing. So I'm happy with that. From what I could see, there were 5 cards in the set that cared about sacrificing clues. So basically, if it would say something like if you sacrifice a clue, do something else in addition. So I like that space, but I feel like there could have been more. Just 5 out of this whole set that cares about investigating that didn't quite mix things up enough. What did you see in this, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'm always happy to see clues. I'm glad they brought it back. It's just like a good, solid kind of mechanic. To gain some advantage, you can do all kinds of degenerate stuff with tokens.
Sure.
I like them a lot.
Yeah.
But I feel like they did play it way too safe with this set. That's supposed to be like all based on investigating and
Mm-hmm.
clues. Like compare that to just like New Capenna, where they kind of went like balls to the wall with treasure
Mm-hmm.
stuff like Bootlegger's Stash and Reign of Riches, all of these other cards that make like a ton of treasures. Agnes. Like there's not a lot of like really crazy clue generation. I mean, there's the card Officious Investigation, where you like pay, I think it's a white and a blue, and you can kind of like make clues based on the number of creatures someone has. I like the Alquist Prof. I think
Right.
like that's an interesting like utilization of a clue you might have because you get extra value from it.
Right. That was one of
But
the 5 that I was talking about. Mm-hmm.
yeah, overall, I think they played it really safe, and I would have liked to see more. I have gotten a chance to play with Forensic Gadgeteer,
Yes, I
and I will
recall.
say that card is awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm at least happy about that. Um, yeah, and
Yeah.
then the only other thing I wanted to point out was I do like the clue weapon. Like the
Mm-hmm.
wrench, the candlestick, lead pipe, knife,
Yes.
and the rope. I think that's interesting. Um, some of the effects are not like the greatest, but I think that's like cool design space, and like more could be done with that. Um, but I did just want to point out that knife, which is the set symbol, is probably the worst one because it doesn't give you any bonus on anyone else's turn.
That's true. Yeah.
It's it's only on your turn. And I don't know when they decided they hate first strike and they only give it this stuff on your turn now, but
Yeah,
You can't defend yourself with a knife?
you would think. I
Would
think
you walk up to a man in the street with a knife and try to punch him in the face? No, of course not. That's
you'd say,
ridiculous.
well, I'll find someone else to punch.
Yeah.
Yeah, they really have.
But no, I
It's a
mean, I
good
do
point with the
like
first
them. They're
string.
cheap. I think they'd be good in like equipment decks or any kind of artifact decks that can value from like an artifact going to graveyard or
Hmm.
whatever. And I just think that is good. But
Yeah, yeah. I think it
I
was.
would have liked it if they were pushed a little.
Yeah, and now that you mentioned these equipment, I think really maybe that was the direction they pushed the furthest in, where it was like they took some cards and also gave them a clue typing. So you've got these equipment that are also clues. There's a land as well that's a clue, and maybe a few other
I
things
do
in
like
there.
that land.
Hmm. I do think that is a good one. Yeah. So yeah, I would have liked to see them go a little further with clues and investigate and make it a little more interesting. But yeah, there's not too much to complain about. I basically going to save all my complaining for the next mechanic, which is collect evidence. And so collect
Yes.
evidence being you can exile. Usually it'll say there'll be a number with collect evidence. So for example, 22 total cards that have collect evidence. There's 5 common, 6 uncommon, 7 rare, and 4 mythic. So all the commons have the value of 6, which I noticed. So basically you collect evidence 6, which means you have to exile a total number of cards from your graveyard with mana value 6 or greater. And so once you do that, you get some kind of I'll say quote unquote bonus effect or enhanced effect from doing so. So I don't know. What do you have to say about this, Colin? How do you feel about collect evidence?
Yeah, this is the one I think I have like the strongest like negative reaction to.
Hmm.
I think that this one doesn't. This is one to me that like I kind of mentioned it earlier, but this one really doesn't make much sense to me
Yeah, the
in
flavor of it.
terms of yeah what it's doing doesn't really make any sense because you're getting immediate an immediate benefit from collecting evidence, which doesn't feel like that's at all how evidence works, right?
Right.
Like you collect a certain amount of evidence and then something immediately happens. But like, that would be like you find a hair, in a murder scene, but it's
Hmm.
still attached to the perpetrator's head.
Right.
Like, okay, well, like that's not how this works at all. Like you should, and you mentioned this with suspect too, right? Like that this feels like it would have been a really good you collect evidence and then you do something with it
Right.
later.
Right.
Like if there was a second component to this or something, I was trying to think about it earlier, like what I would do, how I would kind of redo that. And yeah, I don't know if it's just like you collect evidence and then there's a that something else triggers based off of how much evidence you
Hmm.
collected, and maybe it's not known to the other players. I'm not really sure exactly how you make that happen, but I think that there needs to be some sort of delayed benefit to
Yeah.
that. I
I
think that's
I agree
that's
with you,
where I draw
Colin.
it up.
I thought about this a lot, so I have a few different ideas for it. But to tie in with what you're thinking, I almost felt like this should have fallen into the same space as experience counters, where it's like, okay, things are
Mhm.
happening, and you're kind of accruing this level. You're gaining a personal level that you have, and at some point you can do something with that. Maybe you can spend the evidence that you've collected to accomplish certain things. But
Yeah.
yeah, it felt like it shouldn't just be like suddenly this has happened, and now it's that way. It's like it feels like it's something you should be building up. Like when you're solving a case, that's kind of how these things play out in books and movies and television. You're following along, you're learning more things, you're building up everything that you've seen, and then at the end you use everything you've gained and you pin the culprit, you solve the case. And this is just kind of like we're just we're just pulling stuff out of my graveyard. I don't really get that part of it either. What do you think about that, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on what you were just saying, I think something more akin to like energy,
Mm-hmm.
something that you can
Yeah.
accrue and then spend. That could have been pretty interesting. I mean, overall with collect evidence, I'm like not thrilled.
Yeah.
For any listeners, we generally play casual commander,
Right.
and I just feel like burning your own resources, and especially at such high cost,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's really like not something you want to do. One, you have to like kind of be playing a graveyard strategy anyway to get that many cards into the yard by the time you want to cast a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
spells.
Right.
Granted, like through natural gameplay, you're going to end up with stuff in there, but like we also put a bunch of recursion and you know whatever in our decks to try to like get stuff back that is lost,
Yeah.
right? And then the other thing is, it's like in the format, there's so much graveyard that can like totally just like strip you of being able to get any extra value from these cards.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are like a couple of cards that I think are like mind-boggling bad.
Yes.
Cryptex is one that comes to mind where it's like, ooh, look, a 2-mana rock. But it's like you have to collect evidence 3 to like
To get any mana out
add a
of it.
mana
Yeah.
and a counter, and then you can sack it when it's got 5 to like surveil and draw 3. But that's 15 mana
Yeah.
worth of cards from your graveyard
Yeah. Over
and
5
5
turns. Mm-hmm.
turns of adding 1 mana. It's just like, who has the time to do that? By the time you want to cast it early in the game, you're not going to be able to add mana with it. And then by the time it's late in the game, you're going to need 5 turns, unless you have some kind of untap engine, in order to draw 3 cards and surveil.
Yeah. Yeah, they played it very safe with this mechanic, I think, overall. I think the only cards that are really appealing, or there's one rare where it has ward collect evidence, so your
Yeah.
opponent has to pay for it,
Yeah.
and then the
X
I like
mythics.
that.
Ferox, yeah,
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
I
because
like
you
that
can like
too.
nuke their yard
Yeah.
in response, and then they can't
Right.
like their spell or whatever they're targeting with will
Right.
fizzle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your creature has
Yeah.
effectively
I think
hexproof.
that's the best, yeah, the best use for it. But even like that card, at least if we're thinking of the same one, but that I was gonna bring this one up, the X-Bane Ferox,
Yeah, that's
but
the one.
it's 4/4 Death Touch haste. I mean, it is, I think in a limited environment that would be more compelling to take out. But in like a casual commander set, that you're probably not gonna be troubled too much by that unless it starts to get like
Right.
beefed up or
Yeah.
anything like that. I mean, it's not unlikely that that evidence cost will get paid for a while unless that thing gets some counters on it or something, or it becomes a
Right.
real problem.
Yeah.
But in a limited environment, I think that's I think
Sure.
that's the most compelling use for that
Right.
would be to
You're making your opponent spend resources that they may
yeah
not want to spend to try and get rid of this thing. It's annoying to fight in combat, so if you want to get rid of it out of combat, it's going to be a little bit irritating to do that. So, yeah, I think that's a good use of it. And then a couple of the mythics, I think, all do a good job of it. But beyond that, as Sean said, I think the effects are all more or less incredibly weak if you're not collecting evidence. And then even if you are collecting the evidence, it's not really worth your while to be pushing yourself to accomplish that. Furthermore, if you try and build a deck that is like a collect evidence deck, you're really going to shoot yourself in the foot because these cards, do not work well together. If you're trying to use multiple
Yeah.
cards to exile things out of your own graveyard, you're going to you're going to come up short more often than not. So I think it's a parasitic mechanic with itself, and the value that you're getting from it really is not good.
I mean, it seems like it was mostly designed for limited, where you're trading like 1-for-1 card with one other person,
Sure.
and you're eking out advantage with these cards collecting evidence. But
And you're
for a
unlikely to get them
multiplayer
back from your
format
graveyard.
where there's in a multiplayer format where there's so much recursion and or graveyard hate, it just seems like you could be doing better things.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that really stood out to me with this mechanic is that it only appears on a single white card in the set, which I was shocked to see because, out of, let me see here, I've got 13 out of the 47 detective creatures in the set are white creatures, or at least partly white. So that's 26% of the cards are white, and 3 out of the seven legendary creatures that are detectives are also white. And that there's only one white card that collect evidence appears on, and it happens to be a creature that becomes a legendary detective. So it just seems surprising to me that white is most represented as far as detectives go, but basically least representative as far as collecting evidence. I just thought that was a little bit of a flavor fail. It didn't quite make sense to me.
Yeah, I will say that I do like that card. I think it's 10th District Hero. Is that
Yes.
the name of it?
Yeah, let me grab that. I believe you're right.
But I mostly like it because like the first activation, the collect evidence is like 2.
Yes, it's 2 the first
And then
time, and
the
then
other one
4.
4.
Yeah.
Which I think are kind of reasonable, because that's like a card each.
Yeah.
When it's like 6 or 8, that's like averaging 2 or 3 cards. But with this, I think the second ability payoff too, where you give all your other creatures indestructible, it's like that's pretty good.
Right. The juice is worth the squeeze in this instance, and
Yeah.
yeah, it's just really not in most of the other ones. So I don't think this mechanic makes any sense flavorfully. It's not something you really want to be doing. The payoffs aren't there, and it really just seems like it could have been applied in a way more interesting way. I'm not really sure what they were thinking using it this way. I don't know that it makes sense to, you don't, if you're trying to apprehend a criminal or pin someone for a crime, you don't generally go looking through your own garbage to do that. So that part of it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either. I think this mechanic missed on a lot of occasions, and I guess limited is the preferred format for it, and that's where it makes the most sense. But yeah, just from our point of view, I think they just missed badly with that. So, any other thoughts on
I wonder.
collect evidence? Yeah.
I wonder how it would be if instead of like pulling cards from your own graveyard, had to exile that mana value worth of cards.
I'm always interested in hating on your guys' graveyard, so I would like that better. But I think that
Would that be too good though?
probably is what I think. It probably would be too good.
That's a lot of mana.
It is, and it might make more sense if it was just like you had to hit exactly that number instead of, because as it is now, it's that number or more. So you can really
So
just
you could just like pull card
right,
graveyard, yeah.
right. So they would have to rework it, so it would have to be an exact number or an exact number of cards maybe. But yeah, I would be curious to see that. I think that would be more interesting because honestly, it's like, okay, you're trying to put your opponent away, right? So why not be taking evidence from them? So I think that does
Yeah.
make more sense.
Yeah, I think the way that you phrased it, looking through your own garbage for evidence, is a kind of, it really makes it seem very silly.
Yeah.
Because yeah, unless you're looking to incriminate yourself, I'm not sure why you would do that. I think having graveyard hate would be interesting. It would, you would have to, I think, yeah, do some tweaks on the payoff side of it. I
Yeah.
think you'd have to really kind of rework it, but I think that just from like a logic perspective, I think it would have made more sense had they done it that way.
Absolutely. Okay, so there's basically two mechanics. I'll call them left. That they're not so much mechanics with this first one here as a new kind of card type, but the cases. So basically these new enchantments that come in and give you one effect, and then if you can complete some certain objective, it will unlock a new effect or ability. And what are your thoughts on the cases? There's actually 12 of them altogether, 5 at rare, 7 at uncommon. So very small representation. It's actually the smallest in the set at 12. What do you think about these cases, Colin?
I think these are fine. I think this card, this type of card doesn't always, it just doesn't always speak to me
Mm-hmm.
personally. I think it reminds me of class, right? Was it
Yeah,
class?
the class cards, sure.
Few sets back. What was that? Maybe Baldur's Gate or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that, so this is fine. I mean, I think it's, you have to do stuff for some kind of benefit. You kind of just sort of have it sitting out there. I think it doesn't. I think flavor wise it makes sense, to call it a case, but I don't. It doesn't really like, some of it feels a little passive. I guess you're kind of just sort of waiting for things to happen. Like the one I'm thinking of is the trampled garden.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of, it's solved when your creatures have a total power of 8 or greater. Like that's fine, but that's, you're
Doesn't do
kind of just
much
waiting to
move the
hit that
needle for you.
number.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So I think it's fine. It's one of the ones that it's like, yeah, they kind of bring up this sort of new enchantment type every so often, and it never really like excites me, but it doesn't like. I think evidence was a miss. I think this is fine. I
This
put
is
this
fun.
like with like suspect, where it's like,
Sure.
yeah, okay, I get it.
You don't see yourself maybe utilizing it that much, but it works well enough for you.
Yeah. It doesn't. I don't think it's necessarily wrong. Like maybe a little, like I said, passive, but I don't think there's anything. It's a
Okay.
bad mechanic. I don't think it's a bad thing to include.
Okay. Sean, tell me something I'd rather hear.
I don't know what you want to hear. I mean, I kind of agree with Colin. I think that they're fine. I like when they kind of push the design space with these like new types. With this one in particular, I'm a little curious as to like when or if they'll ever get around to
Mm-hmm.
reprinting more,
Yeah.
because I mean, it seems
Yeah.
very specific to like this murder mystery thing,
Right.
like on a plane that might not ever have murder or mystery surrounding it again. Um, I think a lot of the effects are really good, and you can gain a lot of value from them. A couple of them kind of seem a little pie in the sky
Yeah.
with solving them to me. The case of the ransacked lab comes to mind, where you
Right.
have to cast 4 instants or sorceries um, in one turn to solve it, and then you can like double up your instants of sorceries. I think just like having 4 instants and sorceries in your hand mid game and casting them all in the same turn, even with the cost reduction, is like you got to do some creative deck building in order to pull that off.
True. True.
Just for an enchantment that is going to double your instants and sorceries when there's already like swarm intelligence and
Oh
other
yeah. The Ransack Lab lets you
enchantment.
draw a card whenever you cast an instant or sorcery.
Oh, then I'm misremembered that. That's
Yeah.
even worse. And then
Okay.
the the other one, which I think has like a good first and second, I don't know what you want to call them,
Chapter.
stage.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, is the yeah, the colorless one, which
Case of the Shattered Pact. Here, I'll pull that up.
yeah, that's the one where you search for a basic land, but the solve condition, it needs to be in like a 5 color deck
Yeah.
in order to solve it.
You have to have 5
So
colors among permanents you control. Yeah.
so in our format where it's very much wrapped up in color identity, you're kind like where it would be good is in like decks where you can't really search lands or uh land ramp, so non-green decks of any kind.
Sure.
And then but then that's the only value you get from it for 2 mana. I mean, you
Right.
can just play intro to biology or whatever the colorless spell was from Strixhaven that does
Yeah.
the same thing.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. I agreed. So some of them may not have the most exciting payoffs, but I'm gonna go a little bit different for you guys here, and I think this is the best mechanic in the set. This is my favorite mechanic from the set, and that's just because this new card type is similar to the classes, and I have a strong feeling about the classes. I think they're actually all quite excellent, and so I was excited to see them kind of explore that space a little bit more with these cases here. The one that most excites me is the case of the Locked Hothouse, which is the green one that lets you play an additional land each turn. And then when you have 7 or more, you can play lands, creatures, and enchantments off the top of your deck. Now, I think, again, it takes some time to kind of unlock these things, but that one seems to me to have like the strongest payoff, the most realistic payoff, and I'm excited to see more of these designs. You're right that I don't know when we're gonna get an opportunity to see that. The next, the only other logical set that came to mind would be like Innistrad, where it's like, okay, there's lots of
mm,
mystery in Innistrad, so maybe I don't know if they'll be called cases exactly, or they can just have the enchantment type case, but maybe they not be called case of the whatever. So it's true. I think the biggest shortcoming is that when do these come back, and how they have kind of not they've introduced battles and then just dropped them
yeah.
entirely. It worries me that this is kind of what's going to happen with cases as well. So, but beyond that, I really like the space. I think there's a lot of powerful things that they can do with this, and the design of it I think is pretty interesting. So,
I
okay.
mean, I just think, especially, I understand what you're saying about the cases and the comparison, but I mean, it's easier to just dump mana to like on a turn where you don't have anything to do to
Right, level up
gain
the
extra
class.
value from the class.
Right.
I mean, with these cases, like I think case of the locked hothouse is realistically in EDH the easiest one to probably unlock.
Yeah.
Maybe that or the one where you like have to gain 5 life and then you can sack it
Mm-hmm.
to cast creatures from your yard, the white one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Moon Feast.
but it just seems like a lot of hoops to jump through,
Yeah, I
and I
think.
think a lot of them require a very specific deck build. Like I don't think
Mm-hmm.
there is generally universally good, such as the classes where you can put them in any kind of
True.
deck and count on getting that value.
True. Yeah, and I think I made this comparison before, where maybe the cases are more like planeswalkers, where you cast it and you know you're going to be getting the the plus loyalty and the minus loyalty abilities. You can activate those, and you kind of see the ultimate ability is there, but you don't really plan on getting it. So maybe if the cases are used more in that way or seen that way, that makes more sense. But again, you don't really want to be with a card like this. You kind of want to be taking advantage of the
But if,
solved
if
state.
that were the if that were the case with cases, then you'd have to judge how good the case is based off its only
Exactly.
its full thing.
Exactly.
So it's
Right.
like, is getting a 1 mana discount on your instants and sorceries for 3 mana when there are other enchantments that do that, is that better than any other ones?
Right.
Or
Yeah.
giving 2/1/1 counters to 1 or 2 creatures with like Case of the Trample Guard in it, is that something
Is that enough?
that
Yeah.
you'd be fine putting a piece of cardboard in your deck and maybe never getting any more value from it?
Yeah. That is the interesting aspect to the cases. So I do think they did well at least to make it interesting and make it something that you kind of have to work towards. And I think it's something that works a little more logically than collecting evidence does or suspecting does. These things it just feels a little bit better in that way too. So I guess maybe that's part of why I was more excited for this mechanic. Okay.
I
Some
see
of
what
them
you're
I do really like. I like the Case of the Stashed
Ah,
Skeleton.
yes, you mentioned.
saying.
That one's good. The Case of the Uneaten Feast. I do like that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's okay.
So, I mean, I think a lot of them we just need like to try them out, to see how
Mm-hmm.
easily they can be accomplished.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder with like the uneaten feast, because like creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. There's so many things that do kind of similar things, so it'd be
Mm-hmm.
interesting to see is that worth and at a similar cost. So you know, is it worth taking out something that a creature for that has a similar benefit
Right.
that you can also
Yeah.
then throw in front of a bigger threat later, just for the potential of I mean, I'm sure if you play this in like a life game deck, you're gonna hit the solve point,
Right.
uh, and then you can sacrifice it and bring stuff back from your graveyard. So that like,
Sure.
do you sacrifice that chump blocking ability later? Like, yeah, maybe if you've got some other creatures you can throw in front of it, maybe it's worth testing out just to see. I
Sure.
But
think
you can chump
I
block with
think
your other creatures and then bring them back.
Yeah.
yes, there you
Double
go.
dip.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. Yeah,
Okay.
I guess when I said passive earlier, I guess it's more like a lot of the stuff I feel like will happen over the course of the game kind of naturally. Like the one you brought up, the hothouse one, like you play 7 lands, like as long as the game goes long enough, or if you had built your deck around that, you should get the 7 lands. So you're not going out of your way to do that, I don't think. And if
Yeah.
you're in a life game deck, you'll get 5 life in a turn eventually. If
Yeah.
everything's going
Right.
according to plan. I wonder if like maybe with you guys were kind of hitting on this point with the classes, like the classes you kind of had to go a little bit more out of your way to get to pay up for to move up to the
Mm-hmm.
levels and stuff. So maybe if there was like a little bit more work involved, I guess, because like I think you can kind of just let your deck kind of do what it's doing, and you should hit a few of these. I think just without trying super hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it's a bad. I think it'd be cool. It would be interesting to see work come in, see how they do in place of
Yeah.
some of those other things that maybe we've been running for a while, and you just want to see something different.
Sure.
Kind of try it out, see how it goes.
Okay. Well, there was one last mechanic. We'll just touch on it briefly because it's another returning mechanic, if you even want to call it that. But it's Surveil. I just thought it would be worth mentioning. I thought this was a pretty perfect mechanic to include with this set. I liked the way that it can kind of tie in and help you with your collecting evidence by possibly putting cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. But I will say the one shortcoming I felt like one thing I at least would have liked to seen different with this is possibly introducing a surveil basically for your opponent's library. And not that you can look at
Mhm.
it and change the cards that are on there or put cards from the top of their library into their graveyard, but maybe like looking at the top card of their library to see what they might draw. Or what I thought might have been most interesting was, instead of being called surveil, it could be called like surveillance, and you get to look at a face down creature or something to that effect. Where we've got all these face down things, we're curious about what they are. Why not introduce a mechanic that lets you look at them and potentially turn them face up but without allowing your opponent to receive the ability. Maybe that's too punishing. Like we were talking about how much mana is spent on turning creatures face down, but at least letting you look at what the face down creatures were. Like, I don't really know that there's much in the set that allows you to do that, and I think that could have been a good opportunity to use something kind of thematically for the flavor of the set, for the murder, for the mystery, but also a game mechanic that lets you kind of look at what 40 out of the 40 cards in a set are doing, being face down. So that was just a thought I had when I was looking at Surveil. Any ideas or thoughts on that?
On Surveil in general, or the idea of looking at your
Sure, either or.
opponents? Yeah, I mean, I think just looking at the top card of an opponent's library, I mean, that's pretty valuable. I mean, that's valuable information. So it would have to be, I think, one either used sparingly or kind of like attached to cards without already like super impactful
Mm, yeah.
sets. And I'm now that you mention it too, I am surprised that they didn't include any kind of card that lets you look at face down creatures your opponents control. I feel like that's always been like, I think there was like a 1 mana artifact in Cons of Tarkir that let you do that, and like I feel like they always kind of bake that into these morph sets, and I don't remember seeing one for this, so that is kind of
It feels,
interesting. Maybe,
yeah.
maybe that would take away the mystery, though.
I mean, yes, but that's kind of what you have to do in a mystery. You have to solve it, right? You gotta figure it out. So I feel like they should have given players more of an opportunity to do that in this set.
Yeah, I think that kind of plays into some of what we talked about earlier on, where they kind of gotten themselves into sort of a little bit of a limited design base for
Mm-hmm.
some of this stuff, where like having cards that play off of like abilities that play off of each other doesn't feel like that happens as much anymore. It feels like a lot like I always go back to like Mutate, like they put out Mutate, and Mutate did so many interesting things, so much like crazy stuff, and then it just goes away, and then
Right.
maybe we'll get back to Choreo one of these days. But then it was the similar thing with Adventure. They just
Mm-hmm.
brought Adventure back, but it was another type of thing where it was like it's an ability that you don't really interact with at all. Then like once it happens, it happens. There's no way to like for your opponent
Yeah.
to do anything with it. It's
Right.
just sort of there. Tortel is another one. All these sort of like kind of closed off, things. Which
Yeah.
so this it kind of not surprising. That would have been a neat way to play off of it. I like the idea of surveillance doing something to let you play off of the idea of like looking at, maybe it ties into like that what we said with evidence, where if you had actually were collecting that for some sort of purpose,
Mm-hmm.
long term, I like that. I think surveil by itself though is fine. I think those lands are fine.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
it's like it's always a handy. It's handy to have, even at the expense of coming in tapped. Having that ability if you're desperate for mana, or you're not, desperate for anything but mana.
Yeah.
So
Right.
anytime you can kind of manipulate the top of your library a little bit, I think that's always a welcome
Any
sight.
mechanic that
So
lets players kind of engage more with being able to play the game, seeing the cards that they need
yeah,
to be involved in the game, I think it's good.
smooths
So.
out, smooths out your turn a little bit, gives you a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, I know what's coming, so
Yeah.
I can. I'm good. I can breathe. I can rest easier. Like, oh, gotta move that to the graveyard because that is not gonna help me right now. I like that. Yeah, the
Yeah.
peace of mind is appreciated.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I would have liked to seen maybe some of these mechanics tie a little more into the idea of mystery and noir and how that all actually plays out. So there's some good things and some bad things with all of that. But I think that kind of wraps up all of our major discussion or all the talking points I had for the set. Unless there's something else you guys wanted to bring up.
No, I think we had some good discussion about it. There's nothing I wanted to bring up in addition to this.
Great, Colin.
Yeah. No. I think we covered a lot of good stuff.
I think so too. Great. So that'll wrap up our discussion then. I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity if there's any shout outs or plugs, any projects or things you're interested or looking forward to that you just wanted to mention to our our potential audience.
No, I got nothing.
You got nothing? Colin, what about you?
Nothing to plug.
Yeah, no plugs. I'll give a shout out to Kingsley, who was locked out of Kingsley, my cat, who was locked out of the office. So he didn't make any more appearances on audio.
Fair enough. Okay, great. Well, I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk all this with me here. And I'm looking forward to doing it again for whenever the next set rolls out. So
Absolutely.
that's all for this very first installment of Critics of the Coast. I want to thank Sean and Colin for taking the time to be here, and for anyone else who might have actually listened to all this. We appreciate your time, and hopefully you'll join us again for the next set. For Colin and Sean, I'm Gabe from Unsolicited Designs, and who asked us anyways?